minute if I record. That is recording. Okay, so my name is Natalie Barras and I am in Eastleigh. Today the 11th of January, I think it is. And I'm going to be talking with Lynette. Lynette, please introduce yourself. Give me your full name, if you will.
Okay, my name's Lynette Jeevan. Jeevan was my chosen name after I divorced. So I was born as Lynette Burdett Clark. And I was born... Shall I carry on?
I would love you to carry on. Let's start right at the beginning. Where and when were you born?
Yeah. I was born in Quetta in an Indian Army camp, Indian Army hospital, in February, so it was very cold and snowy, and apparently in a tent, but it would have been a luxury tent. Then my parents met in India. My mother was a voluntary aid, VAD, I don't know what the D stands for, and my father was in the Indian Army, so that's why he was in India. They were both in their early 20s. Then they married in 44 and I was born in 45. Then at some point they moved to Delhi where my sister was born. So she was born in 46. In 1947 India partition happened and my grandfather, who was from India, was a district commissioner of police. And he received threats to his family over the partition issues. And so my parents decided that they would leave for England, because my father was from England, so it was sort of a natural thing for them to do, but quite hard for my mother to do. And so we came by boat. I used to know the name of the boat, but I can't remember it right now. We sailed from Bombay to Southampton, and then my parents went to live in a small village called Upham with my father's parents. So my mother had this difficulty of living with her in-laws. I don't have any memories of leaving India and arriving in England. I have a few odd memories of living with the in-laws. But I think my mother found it quite difficult because she was used to quite a cultured life in India with lots of paid staff. Of course, none of that in England. And also she was quite modern, and I think my grandfather had kittens about her undies being on the washing line because, you know, they weren't the sort of down to the knees, up to the waist variety.
This was the English grandfather?
The English grandfather, yes.
So give me a bit of backstory. Can you describe what your mum and your dad looked like? Because your mum was Indian and your dad was English.
Yes. Well, my father was a very English army sort of type, very upright, moustached. My mother was quite fair-skinned. And she didn't actually acknowledge that she was part Indian. I don't know why, but in India there's lots of prejudice about skin colour. And
was she Anglo-Indian then?
I don't think so, but that's what she claimed to be. Well, in fact, not even that. She didn't acknowledge that there was any Indian blood, which is ridiculous. Her brother was very dark-skinned. So it was just one of my mother's isms, really.
And her parents were Indian?
Yeah.
Okay. So how did your mum and dad meet? Do you know that story?
I don't know. I think it was in the Pink City. Is that Jabalpur?
Pink City, Jaipur?
Jaipur. I don't know really much about how they met and so on. But it was probably by going to the club. That's what people did at that time. And my uncle tells me that my mother was quite brave because she would go to the English clubs and at any point she could have received sort of racial abuse or, you know, not been accepted. But she was fair-skinned and she was very good-looking, so I guess she was socially acceptable. And I guess that is the type of environment in which my parents met.
And your dad was was he in India then? What was the backstory to that?
Because, well, during the war, for whatever reason, he joined the Indian Army, and so he was sent to India. And he served some of his time in what was Ceylon, Sri Lanka, and was training people for jungle warfare in Burma.
All right, so you came by boat. You don't remember anything, but do you remember what your parents said about that journey? Can you remember how long they said it was, what it was like?
I think it was about 6 weeks, and it was very traumatic for my mother because I had pneumonia on the boat, and so I imagine there was limited medical facilities, and she must have been very worried, but I've no knowledge of that, and it doesn't seem to have had any effect long term.
Good. What's your first memory then in your life, Lynette?
Possibly being at my English grandparents' house, just various people visiting. Also going for walks with my mother. My sister would be in one of these great big prams with suspension, and we used to walk around the lanes in Upham. That's probably one of my earliest memories.
And how long were you in Upham for then as a child?
Oh, well, all of my childhood, because my parents then bought a house that was only about 100 yards away from their in-laws. And we went to school in the village. It was quite a small village, only about 600 people.
And what was school like? Can you remember that?
Yeah, I enjoyed school. It was interesting. People in the village just thought that my mother was Indian. And so the kids at school knew that we were from India. And I remember a radio programme that was aimed at school children, where they documented the life of people in India. And of course, it was all mud huts and that sort of thing. And everybody just, they would say to me afterwards, oh, so that you had a mud hut to live in. And they didn't really understand what we came from.
What did you think or feel when you're said that by people that
I just thought they were ignorant. It didn't faze me in any way. I just explained, oh, no, you're wrong.
Okay, so tell me, growing up, what life was like. So people knew that your mum was from India and that your dad was from England. Apart from this radio show, was anything ever said about that, or any oddness? Or
Not really. I don't think that my parents ever experienced any sort of racial prejudice or difficulty. I've no memory of that sort of thing. And my parents didn't talk about it. And as my mother didn't accept that she was Indian, she had no reason to.
How much of India came with you to England in terms of food or clothes or language?
Well, my mother had a lot of, well, I don't know whether it was a lot, but she had handmade clothes and handmade shoes. So she had quite posh clothes. And I remember high-heeled shoes that were made of suede, lots of different colours. So she was ahead of her time. You know, rural Britain didn't see that sort of thing. And also she wore makeup. She always wore bright red lipstick. And in the village she was called the lipstick lady.
So where was your mum from in India?
All over, because my grandfather, well, northern India, the Punjab and Delhi, maybe. My mother was born close to Calcutta, a place called Katihar, but I never can find it on the map. It's quite small. So they moved around with the police.
Okay. So tell me, go back to you growing up in Upham. So school, any memories from there? Was it sort of village school? How many children?
Yeah, it was a village school. There were 3 classes, maybe about 20 children in each class. And I think they thought we were quite spoilt because on the first day that I went to school, which was when I was 4, my mother came and she wanted us to decide, whether we wanted school lunch or not, and teachers didn't understand that because, you went to school, you went to have lunch, My mum was willing for us to decide, at lunchtime what we would do, and the school weren't used to that kind of flexibility.
I think your mum sounds a real character. All right, so school, living in Upham, what subjects did you enjoy at school? What did you kind of excel in?
Well, I was quite good. I said that I started at 4, and I think that was because I was quite, school ready, and I was always a year younger than everybody else in the class. And I did quite well. There weren't particular things that I liked, but I was good at maths.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came to secondary school, because my parents were Catholics, they didn't want us, although I passed my 11 plus, they didn't want us to go to a co-ed school. So I got packed off to the convent in Southampton, St Anne's,
mm-hmm.
which I didn't particularly like. And then for the 6th form I transferred to Winchester Grammar School because it was free. My St Anne's was fee paying.
Okay, tell me about St Anne's. What didn't you enjoy there?
The nuns, basically. They were not very warm, very disciplinarian, not very empathetic. And the subjects that I liked most was biology.
Mm-hmm.
I used to like dissection, particularly.
Mm-hmm.
But the nuns were quite harsh, and I didn't enjoy that.
Was that in the days of corporal punishment?
They used to hit people on their arm with a ruler, but I don't think they did anything much more savage than that.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to wear uniform?
Oh, yes.
What was the uniform?
It was a blue shirt and a navy blue gym slip. And we had to have indoor shoes. And it was quite hard on my parents because by now they had 6 children. And buying the school uniform, you bought it from one particular shop that had the monopoly, and so it was expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And also my other 2 sisters went to St Anne's, so it was quite hard for them to afford the fees.
Okay, so talk me through kind of, in terms of your life, how old you were when your different siblings were born and whether it was brother, sister.
Well, my first sister was born in Delhi and she was 18 months younger than me. And then there was a gap of about 3 years and my second sister was born. And because my mother was used to a posh life in India, she went into a private ward in Winchester. And I think that was frowned upon, by the in-laws.
Why?
Oh, because it was sort of above her station, I think. And then there was a gap of maybe 4 years and my first brother was born. That's interesting because it's the first time I've ever seen my father cry when he got news that he'd, got this son at last. That's why they had so many children, I think. And then there was a gap of about 3 years, and then my brother Andrew was born, and then 18 months later, my youngest brother Simon was born.
Okay, interesting you say that about your dad. That's almost an Indian attitude, I would say, about waiting for the son.
Oh yes.
But that was the first time.
Oh, it's very much. Dad wanted a son.
How did he adapt to life back in England?
Well, to begin with, he was in the army. That's one of my early memories of him being in uniform in the house that my parents bought. Then I think he had an affair because my parents would, well, maybe not even occasionally, row about this. I don't have any memory of him being at my grandparents' house. So maybe he was off in the army somewhere. I think he used to go to Aldershot.
Mm-hmm. So your mum would live with the children?
Yeah, I think so. She just had one child when... Maybe she didn't even have the child at that house. I don't think they stayed there too long, not longer than a year.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the house that you moved to then. They bought their house.
Yes.
What was it like? Can you describe it?
It was a house that had been built for a gardener who worked on the estate next to the house. So it was a 3-bedroomed house, detached, with a reasonable sized garden. People used to think Dad should have grown vegetables because he was mad keen on rock gardens. So he had a rock garden. But people thought he should have grown vegetables because he had such a large family. One of the things I remember, my mother loved flowers, and she had these brass vases which were actually shell cases.
You mean from the, like, ammunition?
Yes. My father was in the Gunners, so maybe he had access to such stuff. Yes, they were sort of empty shell cases that were polished, highly polished brass. They must have been expensive.
That's a lot of brass, I would imagine.
Yeah, they were heavy, but they're sort of big.
Mm-hmm.
I remember daffodils in them.
Did your mum and dad bring any items from India with them when they left?
Well, my mother's clothes. Oh, we had, an Indian rug on the landing upstairs that gradually got threadbare because all the people trampling across it. We had a nest of, a table, an octagonal table that was very ornate and would always fall to pieces. We were always trying to reassemble it. And some beautiful, I think from Kashmir, metal boxes, octagonal and rectangle, made of brass, copper and silver. I've got one at home. They were beautiful. And some Kashmiri papier-mâché lamp bases that were beautifully, ornately painted with birds.
Beautiful.
And other sort of natural things. Mummy had a few bits of jewellery. One thing I particularly liked was the hairpiece that brides wore. That was from Sri Lanka with pigeon blood rubies. Anything else? I can't remember anything in particular.
How did she keep in touch with her family?
I think just by letter. But then her parents and her brother came to England in about 1950, early 50s, and they lived in London. They rented.
Did they come because she was able to help bring them here?
I don't think so. I don't recollect any stories of that. I think they just came to join her.
Mm-hmm.
And they were British subjects anyway. They had British passports. My mother had a British passport.
How was that? How?
I don't know. I think it must have been who they worked for in India.
Okay.
And I don't know. I never questioned that. We were always British.
Mm-hmm. How often would you get to see them?
When they came to England, we would visit them fairly regularly. They didn't very often come to the village, but when they did, there would be a crowd at the bottom of our driveway. It wasn't a very big driveway, but at the bottom of the path, people would just gather and stare, and we never knew why, but it must have been because they were all dark-skinned.
Would they be wearing Indian clothes or
No,
Western clothes?
Western clothes. but it was because they were dark-skinned. They were much darker skinned than my mother, particularly my uncle.
Mm-hmm. How did that make you feel when the villagers stood at the bottom of the road?
I just felt puzzled because I didn't understand why. And my parents weren't good at discussing colour or issues like that. Mm-hmm. So we had to just work it out for ourselves.
Interesting. Okay, so you went to St Anne's, mm-hmm. You enjoyed your dissections. What did you want to do, job-wise, when you left school?
Oh, well, I was told by my parents, particularly my father, that I was going to be a doctor. But so I used to just sort of say that when I was asked what I wanted to be. But I just felt that that was sort of like an obligation. That's what I had to do. But actually, I didn't do so well with my O-levels, so that became sort of forgotten about. And then I changed schools, and then after that I went to university.
Where did you change schools to after St Anne's?
To Winchester Girls' Grammar School.
Okay.
And that was really because my father was fed up of paying fees for somebody who wasn't flourishing at school. So then my mum, who was much more protective of us, arranged for me to swap to Winchester.
To go to a grammar school, you had to do the...
Oh, I had passed the 11 plus years ago, but my parents decided not to accept that because they wanted me to go to a Catholic school.
Mm-hmm. How did you enjoy grammar school?
Oh, that was okay. Then I left home because my father and I were rowing a lot, and I went to live with a family in Southampton where the father of the family was a lecturer at Southampton University, and I got a lift from somebody from Southampton to Winchester, and she was my biology teacher, and she was really nice. So I felt quite supported at Winchester School.
How old were you when you left home?
17.
Okay. And you said you and your dad would row. What kind of things would you row about?
I've no idea. One of the things was the length of my nails. He used to sometimes drive us to school, and he wouldn't let me get out of the car till I'd chopped all my nails down. He was quite a bully that way. I think we just rowed about everything.
Mm-hmm. And how was your mum in that dynamic between you all then?
Oh, it's difficult to say. I think she really sided with my dad. I think she explained that she thought that would make it ease the situation rather than siding with me. But she sort of helped me leave home. She walked... We lived a fair distance from any bus stop, so she walked down the village with me and sort of put me on the bus. And then I went to stay with a friend, and then I sorted out this family that took me in Southampton.
How do you do that? How do you find a family to take you in?
I think that was done through my biology teacher, because I think school must have got to know what was happening, and they must have helped. But it was fairly unusual, really.
I think so, yeah. Even in today's day, I think that's quite an unusual situation. How did that make you feel, moving out of home?
I was relieved. I was quite naive, really, because all my friends at school, they would meet after school in town and go shopping and things like that. I hadn't experienced anything like that. So it was a new beginning, really.
How did you survive for money?
The family that I lived with, the woman was a teacher part-time, so I used to look after the kids while she taught, and I only went to school part-time. I don't know. The school must have been quite cooperative to allow me to do that.
Mm-hmm. So that was in Southampton that you moved to. Is that your sort of first... Oh, no, you'd been to Southampton because of St Anne's, is that right?
Mm.
Can you remember the first time you kind of knew Southampton or went to Southampton? Did you go there before you went to St Anne's, or was going to St Anne's the first time?
No, my dad actually worked in Southampton, so we would have driven in with him. I remember the bomb damage around the harbour area.
What was that like?
Well, just rubble.
What year would that have been?
It's got to be the early 50s, I think. Yeah, that's really all that I remember about Southampton, and then buying my school uniform. Oh, my grandmother used to take us into Southampton as a little treat. I think she was one of those once a week, maybe it was only once a month, she would go to a shop called May's, and we would have to trample around the shop with her, and she'd talk to every shop assistant for hours and hours and hours, and we'd be bored out of our skin. And then the climax of the afternoon would be to have tea and cakes, and there would be somebody playing a piano, and we were allowed to go and request things like Teddy Bear's Picnic.
Where was that? Where could you go for tea and cake with a piano in Southampton?
A department store called May's.
Oh, all in the department store?
Yes, yes.
Where was May's?
I think it was around the bar, somewhere there. It's gone now, I think. But it was somewhere in the region of the bar.
Oh, I'm going to do some research on that.
Yeah.
Can you describe what it was like, what it sort of looked like? And...
No, not really. It was quite big and sort of sold everything clothes-wise. I don't remember it very much.
It sounds very fancy. I'm surprised about Southampton, actually, and so long after the end of the war, you still noticing that?
Yeah, because I would have been 5 or 6.
I'm going to try and find some photos, actually, of that and see sort of what happened in Southampton. You then went to Winchester. How does Winchester compare, or how did Winchester compare to Southampton in your mind?
Winchester was a bit more genteel, I think. Not so crowded, a bit more leisurely. But we had quite a long walk, about a mile from the bus stop to the school and back. And Winchester School, I think, it was more relaxed. And then I had this biology teacher who was particularly supportive and friendly.
What was her name?
Mrs. Porter.
What was she like? Describe her.
She was quite young. It was before she had children, so she would have been in her early 20s, I think. She was quite fashionable. And she had a little room at the back of the biology lab that the sixth formers were allowed to congregate in. And she had her coat and hat hung on the back of the door, and we used to try them on quietly when she wasn't looking.
How long were you there for? Was that
A couple of years.
And what were you studying there?
There I was doing zoology, chemistry and physics.
Wow. What was the plan then after college?
I don't know. I just did the subjects I liked that sort of went together. And then somehow or other I ended up in London, but I can't remember why, how that came about. Oh yes, I know. I was going to do nursing. So I went to Isleworth Hospital to start nursing, but after about 6 months I gave that up. And I worked for Beecham's in a biology lab, and from there I applied to go to university.
Okay. What was it about nursing that wasn't up your street?
I think it was the discipline, really, and also my friend and I started dating some Fijian boys of Indian origin, and we used to skip out at night and stay with them. And I think it was getting quite close to the line, you know, I think we were going to be discovered and probably chucked out. So, because in those days, people didn't live together or do that sort of thing. So I think we quit before they kicked us out.
Did you keep in touch with the Fijians?
No. Although I did meet one of them again later because he came to the same uni as me.
So tell me, you went from nursing to then university. Where did you go for uni and what were you studying?
I went to Brunel. In those days, the biology department in Brunel was in Acton in London, but then it moved to the new campus in Uxbridge. And I did a sandwich course, which was part uni and part working for 3 years, and then the final year was entirely at college. And I did physiology and biochemistry.
And where did you live when you were doing this?
In a flat in Richmond most of the time.
That sounds quite nice.
Yes, it was. It was a lovely house. We had 2 floors, and there was a flight of steps up to the flat and lovely bay windows. And it was a mixed flat. There were a couple of girls and a couple of lads.
Okay, so university then finished.
Mm-hmm.
You got your degree or your qualifications.
Yes.
Then where did you go?
And then I'd met somebody at uni, so we married and lived in High Wycombe.
Okay.
But worked. He worked as a lab assistant at uni, and then I got a job there just to sort of tide me over for a while. And then I started having children.
How many children and how old were you when they occurred?
I was 28 when I had Natasha, and then 4 years later I had Anya, and then 4 years after that I had Nina.
3 girls?
3 girls.
How was your dad about you having 3 girls?
I don't know really. I think it was when I had Nina, he was actually in India. He didn't particularly remark about it.
And how involved were your parents in your life with your children?
Not a lot, really. They were still living in Upham. They both died from that house that they bought back in 47-ish. So because of the distance, we didn't see them a lot. And although Mum knitted all the baby clothes, mm-hmm. so in that way she was involved. My in-laws were hopeless. They didn't do anything for the children. So Mum was very involved in that way, but we didn't see very much of them.
Did your mum ever work?
Eventually, she did her nurse training. In India, she was a VAD. I think that's Voluntary Aid Department. And then, after having all these children, she did her nurse training, and she was at Winchester Hospital.
Okay. So was that before you did your nurse training or after you did your...
Oh, miles after. My mum must have been in her 60s, I think, or late 50s, because she had her last child when she was about 42.
Wow. So did you think you inspired her to do her nursing?
No. I think it came from her history of being a VAD mm-hmm. in the war, because she worked in a hospital ship. And, that was an interesting thought. She was in a hospital ship, and one particular time it went to South Africa, and my mum was really worried about how she would be perceived in South Africa.
Why?
Because of her colour.
What did she say? What do you mean?
I don't remember her actually discussing it. Maybe I overheard conversations about it, because she didn't discuss it with me, but I know that that's what she was concerned about.
Because they would see her as white or
as
not
coloured,
white?
as not white. Yes.
Where do you think this thing with your mum and almost denying who she is?
She did deny. I think it came from the British being the upper crust in India, and she associated with that. And being Indian would have deterred her from, or banned her from those sort of privileges. So she took on this persona of not having any Indian blood.
How do you feel about that as somebody?
I'm quite cross about it because I'm very pro-India and wanted to know more about India. And when my grandparents came over from India, which would have been early 50s, they still cooked lots of Indian food. That would have been their natural way of eating. And that's where we really learned about Indian food.
Oh, interesting. So what would you eat when your grandparents weren't there? What would your mum cook, for example?
Oh, my mum just prided herself in English cookery. We just ate English food. We didn't have curries at all.
English food like?
Like, you know, roast beef at the weekends and Irish stew, spaghetti. Nothing Indian at all.
So what did you learn then from your grandparents?
Well, we watched Indian food being cooked, you know, onions and garlic and spicy smells. And they had all the Indian saucepans, Dixies, and they wore Indian sandals, chappals. And, you know, when they first came to England, they brought sweets for us, and which we didn't recognise at all, sort of candy things, which we didn't particularly like. And they made pudding sweets out of semolina.
Mm-hmm.
And poppadoms and chapatis.
Would they speak to you sometimes not in English?
No. Although my uncle could speak Urdu, and he had a very good job in India. He was a newsreader, so he also experienced the sort of coming down, like being demoted and having to get, you know, just a humdrum office job.
Mm. Your mum's family, were they Catholic or Hindu?
Yes, they were Catholic.
They were all Catholic.
Mm.
Okay, and from the region where you were born, that was where they were from, or not? Where they were all over?
They were all over because my uncle was born in Lahore. That's Pakistan now. I think my grandparents both were born in Delhi. I'm not sure. My daughter did a history of the family, and she knows more about this. She traced our listings on the boat that came to England.
I'd love to talk to her about that.
Might have been Canberra. I'm not sure.
Is your daughter, which daughter? Natalia?
No, Anya. I think you've seen her. I think you might have seen Anya.
Anya came the other week?
Yes.
So she's got all the research and stuff?
Yes.
Oh.
Only she's packing, so she won't be able to access it.
Okay.
But I could maybe email you.
Yeah, at some point in the future.
Yes.
Because what we're doing with this project is creating part of an exhibition at the Sea City Museum. Mm-hmm. So any old photos, any documents, if she's done that research, it would be amazing, so that we're not kind of repeating ourselves, but to link your story to that would be great. Anyway, let's carry on
about that.
With your story. I want to go back in time. I know you don't remember this because you were very little, but you were saying that your mum and your dad, or actually your grandfather, was getting threats because he was the police commissioner. Do you know sort of what that involved, or what was being said,
No,
or the reasoning?
no.
Or?
And I think probably that my parents wouldn't have told us about that, but I think it was the reason why they decided that not to stay in India.
All right, so where did we get to in the story? You have had your children. Did you stop working at that point?
Yes, yes.
How did you then adapt to being a housewife, home mummy?
Oh, I think I find it quite easy. Because I didn't really have a proper career. I did do a bit of teaching when I was pregnant with my first one. And then it seemed quite natural to be at home. And we lived on an estate where there were lots of other parents with children of my children's age.
Whereabouts was that?
That was High Wycombe.
Okay.
Well,
And
near High Wycombe.
how long were you in High Wycombe for?
A long time, because Tasha was 16 when we moved away, so it would have been about 18 years.
Where did you move to next?
Oh, well, by this time I had divorced.
Okay.
But it was quite tricky because he only moved to a neighbouring town, Maidenhead, and relationship was quite fraught. So then I moved to the Isle of Arran in Scotland.
Why?
Well, because by this time I'd also met another man, and he had, his parents had a house on Arran, so we decided we'd go and buy a house on Arran. But it was quite nice for my kids because all secondary school kids on Arran went to the same school, so they got to know the entire island.
What is the Isle of Arran like? I can imagine it's not like anything we've seen from here.
It's like a miniature Scotland, because the north of the island has mountains and the south is quite agricultural, quite like around Perth sort of area. And there are a lot of English people there.
Okay.
You had to learn how to live on an island, really, because food and such like, you couldn't buy everything. You had to do the occasional shop on the mainland.
What couldn't you get hold of so easily?
Well, things like mushrooms and tinned fish for some reason. I remember buying them when we went onto the mainland. Fresh vegetables were all right because people would grow them and sell them. But it was really getting used to the isolation, I suppose.
Was that easy to do?
I don't think I find it particularly difficult. Arran is very beautiful. Wherever you look, there is something really pleasant to see. And the second house that we lived in, we had a view right over the sea to the mainland and to Ailsa Craig. And occasionally we could see Northern Ireland.
Wow.
So it was beautiful.
How long were you there for?
8 years. But then my eldest daughter left and she started going to uni in London. And then when my youngest, Nina, had finished school and then she was off to uni, I decided to leave because it would be too difficult for them to visit. So I came back down to Southampton.
Still with your husband, or?
Oh, no. That had ended.
So you came back to where?
I came back to as close to Upham as I could, because my parents were now in their 80s. So I came to Horton Heath, where I am now.
Okay. And how... your parents were still together, despite whatever happened with your dad and the other woman or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think that lasted long. I think the rise lasted much longer.
What was the dynamic between your mum and dad?
Oh, they fought all the time. They were tumultuous sort of relationship. I think my mother wasn't particularly welcomed by her in-laws, and that didn't help.
Do you think it's interesting, isn't it? Like, so my parents are divorced, and I don't think I would ever stay in a marriage for sort of longer than necessary. But it's interesting that your parents stayed together despite the sort of...
But that was because they were Catholics.
Ah. How Catholic are you?
Not at all. But my parents were devout Catholics. So they would have never... They might have separated. But I don't think, actually, that my mother was independent enough. Oh, confident, probably. She wasn't confident enough to think that she could manage on her own financially.
Even though she'd come to the other side of the world?
Yes, yes.
Interesting. So you moved to where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
How far is that from Southampton? I don't know geographically sort of where we are.
Well, Upham was about a half-hour drive, so maybe about 12 miles from Southampton, and where I live now is about 7-8 miles from Southampton.
And so is Southampton the major city closest to you, or is Winchester closer?
Winchester is slightly closer, but Southampton's bigger. But I don't go to either of them very much.
When and why would you go into Southampton nowadays? What sort of takes you in there?
It used to be to buy Indian food, but there's an Indian shop in Eastleigh now.
Is there? Where's the Indian shop?
This road. If you go the first road that you come to, not quite down as far as Iceland, but on the opposite side, RJS, I think it is.
Wow. Okay, so tell me about, so previously you would go to Southampton for buying Indian food. So what would you buy and where would you have to go to get that?
Derby Road, there's a particular shop, I think it's Raj. No, it isn't Raj. I can't remember the name of it. Oh, the International, that was it. And I'd buy pita bread, poppadoms, and then lentils, rice, spices, lime pickle, nuts. That's it, really.
Mm-hmm. How Indian do you feel?
Probably not very much, but that's why I joined AWCA.
Let's talk about AWCA, because that's where we are today. It's in the cupboard doing this interview, but explain to me AWCA.
Well, I was aware of AWCA while I worked for Eastleigh Borough Council in the housing department, and I got to know Rajni. And then when I retired, I started coming to the meetings. First, I felt very, very strange and sort of not very comfortable. I always used to long for Rajni to turn up, because then I felt more comfortable and I'd have somebody to talk to. And I found it very strange. We always sit with men on one side of the hall and the women on the other, and always the men get served food first.
Really? I've noticed about the separation, but I haven't noticed about the men being served first.
Always the men get served first.
What's the purpose of this get-together or the group?
Well, originally it was started by Moss because he was aware that there were quite a few isolated Asians, particularly men, sort of sitting on park benches with nothing to do, because they were living with their children and maybe weren't that welcome all of the time at home, so they went out and they had nothing really to do. So it was decided that some kind of a club would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. So what do you guys get together and do?
Mostly it's people come for a good chinwag That's mostly what it is. But we do things like we have outings. We've been up to the Houses of Parliament. We go for picnics, sort of bring and share picnics. We've been to Itchen Valley Country Park and made bird boxes. What else have we done? I can't think of anything else. We used to have sort of crafting afternoons.
Mm-hmm. And who are the sort of people, the ages and the types of people that come?
Mostly elderly people. It's all people of retirement age and older. So a great number are in their 80s.
Mm-hmm.
A few of the men play cards. Oh, and we also have guest speakers, you know, like the police, people might health talks about pancreatic cancer or bowel cancer and how to prevent it, mm-hmm. that sort of thing.
And how else do you stay connected to India and sort of, do you think it sounds like you're quite pro holding on to your heritage and celebrating it.
Yes, that's why I joined AWCA, really.
Mm. And compared to your mum, who was very much renouncing it, how else do you keep your connect to India?
Well, we used to have, my mother's aunt, Auntie Frida, was alive and living in Delhi, but now she has died. So really, I don't have a connection to India anymore. There's no family there left.
When did you first visit after you left?
Oh, not till I was working for Eastleigh. First time I had a job with money. And so I would have been in my 50s before I visited India.
Where did you go?
I went to the north. I went on a tiger. I don't think it was called a safari, but it was, you know, an adventure. Going to the national parks that had tigers. But then I felt ill. I had some sort of bad effect from my malaria tablets, and I ended up in hospital, being airlifted to hospital. I went completely crazy.
Were you taking Lariam?
No, I can't remember what the drugs were. I used to know. But one of them, I remember reading, you know, side effects could be psychotic. And I had a psychotic attack. I was chucking all the furniture into the swimming pool and that sort of thing. I really went crazy. And they called the police. They had to block off the swimming pool. Then they had to take me by jeep to somewhere where they could take me to hospital, and then I got flown from there to Delhi and admitted to hospital there. So I wasted all that money on a holiday that I didn't have.
At which point did they realise it was the malaria tablets, or did you realise it was the malaria?
I think the medics realised it was the malaria tablets because I stopped taking them. Yeah, it annoyed me because I'd paid quite a lot of money for them.
I also had a similar, not on that scale, but with malaria tablets, and I think the ones that I took got banned afterwards.
It was two types. One, I think you took one every day, and one you took once a week. And it only took me about a week to completely go crazy.
Yeah, awful, awful. Gosh, sorry you had to experience that. So that was your first experience of India again. Did you then after that go back on any other trips?
I don't know quite how, but I met somebody in Southampton who was involved with a sort of self-help sewing group of women in Pondicherry in South India, and so I've been a couple of times to visit them.
Mm-hmm. And any more trips planned imminently?
Nothing at the moment because I'm busy trying to move house.
Where are you moving to?
Well, my youngest daughter moved to Ireland and she's had a little boy there. And she suggested this summer that both Anya and I would move, not expecting Anya to agree, and she did agree. So Anya's found a house that she's going to buy, and she should be moving in a month or so.
And so then when you sell yours, you'll then follow?
Yes, my house is on the market, and then I'll follow.
How do you feel about moving to a new place?
Thinking, oh, it would be quite good to have a new start, everything being new. It'd be exciting to sort of explore. And then I think, since I've been in my house, I've had the kitchen renewed and the bathroom renewed, and I've got a lovely garden, quite a big one for a modern house. And I sort of think, this is quite nice, but it doesn't compare to being over there with Nina and her little boy and with Anya as well. So I'm looking forward to it, apart from the weather.
When you sort of look at life so far, are you where you thought you would be?
I don't think I ever looked forward to where I thought I would be. I just sort of took it as it came.
What's your sort of philosophy then for life and living?
I'm not sure I have a philosophy. Just to try and live within the bounds of the planet, not to do it any harm, and otherwise have good relationships.
Mm-hmm. I've got a list of questions that I'm just going to check that I've kind of covered everything.
Actually, something that I forgot to mention was that my mum went to school in Simla because, working for the British, the police would always move up to Simla to be out of the heat of the plains. So she went to school, a Catholic school in Simla. And actually, it's the same school that Rajni went to.
I remember you discussing that actually the other day. Small world. I would like to talk to Rajni about that as well. What did your mum say about Shimla? What?
Oh, she loved it. Only she would have called it Simla because that's what the British did, not Shimla.
Is Shimla the Indian way? In my head it's Shimla.
Like Mumbai and Bombay.
And what would she call that?
Bombay. But I don't think it had been changed to Mumbai for quite some time.
Maybe even if it had been changed, I think.
She wouldn't have used it, yes. But she loved the nuns and all that. And she did tell us stories about how she was frightened of monkeys because she had to walk to school and monkeys would be on the route.
I love monkeys. Mm-hmm. All right, so I'm just quickly scanning through these topics and questions. What do you... Part of this project is about people's journey, but it's also about the city of Southampton. So from your experience of Southampton, how have you seen Southampton change over the years?
Well, it's been rebuilt. I think it's become more commercial. I think the shopping area is much bigger. But as I don't go there a lot, I'm not really aware of it. I'm more aware of the common and there's a wildlife, the Hawthorns.
What's that?
Place. It's a sort of a wildlife centre where they exhibit all sorts of natural history, and you can go pond dipping and that sort of thing.
I've not heard of that place.
Oh, it's on the common.
Oh, okay.
The Hawthorns.
Are you a walker? Do you enjoy a...
I used to when I had a dog, but I don't really walk very much now. I'm a gardener. That's how I exercise mostly.
Tell me about your dog.
Oh, she was a puppy from my middle daughter, Anya, had a black sort of Labradorish mongrel who then had 6 puppies. When she moved, she stayed in Scotland for a while. When she moved down, her dog was heavily pregnant and had the puppies in my hallway. And then we kept them for a few weeks, and I kept one of them. And she was lovely. She was she looked like a miniature Labrador, golden coloured. And she lived for about 13 years.
Have you thought about getting another dog?
No, I've decided I'm too old, you know, because another dog would probably outlive me. To end on a happy note.
Let me ask some other questions before we end there. One of the things that I wanted to speak to you about was being, I mean, we've talked about it in this interview anyway, about mixed heritage and also like interracial relationships. And actually you mentioned it in passing about your Fijian boyfriend, for example. What's your sort of thoughts on that, I guess, in kind of different cultures coming together and when people are the children of two cultures?
Oh, I'm all for it. My parents were absolutely ballistic about having an Indian boyfriend. You know, they actually came up to London. Mind you, we were staying there. Not that my parents, they may have suspected, but they didn't know. But yeah, my father actually threatened to shoot him. So, and I think he did actually have a gun illegally from the war. A handgun.
Wow. So there was like a showdown meeting between...
Yeah, they just pitched up one day. I don't know how they got to know.
What do you remember of that?
I just remember them storming down the stairs, sort of making threats. Yeah, and I think the men were quite scared.
I think they probably had every right to be, yes. When, I don't know if anyone ever asks you this, because I'm assuming when most people, and I will say when I first met you, I thought you were white British.
Yes. When I came here to the club, they all think I'm white British, which I'm really sad about.
Why? Explain that to me.
Well, because I would like to be recognised as being part Indian. But it doesn't show. All of us, except, this is interesting, my younger sister, Sue, she's a bit darker than me, but she goes very dark in the sun. And her children have told me that she says that people treat her differently when she's dark.
In what way?
I don't know in what way. People are less friendly to her.
Obviously this is radio and audio, but describe how you looked and how you look now, actually. Even eye colour, you have quite fair eyes, don't you?
Yes. My sister has got quite dark eyes, but most of us took very English characteristics.
Your mum was dark-eyed or fair-eyed? Green-eyed, blue-eyed?
I think she was dark-eyed. Do you know, I can't remember. No, she was dark-eyed. My father was sort of hazel-coloured eyes, and that's what most of us have inherited.
You told me with your surname you chose to adopt... Was that your mother's surname?
No. My mother's surname was Terry, and my father's surname was Clark. But being a snob, he changed to Burdett Clark. He says that the reason was that in the army there were two John Clarks and their mail would get muddled. So he added his second name, Burdett, to his surname and became Major Burdett Clark. But Jeevan, when I divorced, I didn't want to remain with my married name, obviously, and I didn't particularly want to take my father's name, so I decided I'd take my own name, and it's Hindi for life. So I asked a friend of mine who had lived in India, you know, what the Hindi for life was, because the idea was life after divorce.
I think that's fabulous. How important is a name to someone's identity?
I think it is quite important.
In what way?
I seem to remember discussing this with somebody sometime. I don't know, but name does indicate something of your heritage, and that's really what I wanted to do with my name Jeevan.
I know some people that come from India that are born with Indian names, obviously. When they come overseas, they then change it. And same in China, they take an more English-sounding name. And it's interesting that you've done the reverse.
Opposite, yes.
I quite love that, actually.
But then when I came here, lots of people thought that I was married to an Indian. They didn't see it as my identity.
When does anyone ever say to you, because I know a lot of people that maybe have darker skin or have obviously non-English names, a lot of people will say to them, well, where are you from? You know, or where are you really from? Do you ever get that? Do you ever
No, I don't. I'd quite like it if I did, but I don't.
Lynette, where are you from? Where are you from? If I ask you that question, what do you say?
I always say that I was born in Quetta, which is now Pakistan.
And what do you identify as? If someone says, what is your when you have to fill out those forms?
I always put Anglo-Indian.
Okay. What is the... So Anglo-Indian is different, isn't it, as a sort of culture to Indian or Pakistani? What is the sort of markers of being an Anglo-Indian then? What does that mean to you?
Well, it just means, to me, it's just a sort of genetic term, you know, Anglo for my father, Indian for my mother. So that's how I see it, not as a culture. And
your children, what do they...
I think my eldest daughter used to put Anglo-Indian, but the others, they just put British. I don't think they would put English.
Why not?
Because we've got a mixed culture, a mixed ethnicity, I think.
Brilliant. Lynette, thank you. This has been so interesting.
Really? Oh, I'm glad.
No, and how has it been for you, sort of talking about your life and sort of who you are and your experiences?
It's quite nice because people don't very often ask about yourself. So I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Anything else that we've forgotten? Any big major...
No, it's just the bit about Shimla.
If you had to sort of do a potted history of life, of Lynette's life, what would you say were the sort of major... You know, we kind of in life have like these crossroads or these sort of markers, whether it's like the death of a parent, for example, or a marriage or a marriage breakup. What for you in Lynette's life, if you just had to kind of plot it out in a line, what would you say your key...
The key thing is being born in India, I think. Probably being raised in a rural situation in England, then uni, marriage, children, and returning back, so it would be Scotland and then returning back to Hampshire.
Fabulous. Well, I wish you the best of luck moving forwards and the journey to Ireland. Lynette, thank you.
It'll be a nice beginning.
And there we shall pause.